Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Cate Doty, who's here to share with us her new book, Mergers and Acquisitions, or Everything I Know About Love I Learned on the Wedding Pages. So can the wedding section of the New York Times teach us about love? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Cate Doty is a writer and former editor at the New York Times, where she worked for nearly 15 years, including as a wedding announcement writer, presidential campaign reporter, and a senior staff editor on the food desk. She occasionally teaches journalism at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, from which she graduated. So welcome to the show, Cate Doty.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. You know, I have to ask you, what was the inspiration behind this?
Well, so I started writing these wedding announcements for the New York Times when I was about 24, and I was at the tail end of a turbulent end of college, post-college relationship. I think, many of us have been there and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, professionally, romantically, whatnot. And while I was writing the wedding announcements, I started dating the man who was now my husband, and we've been married 11 years. And so this is really a story of not just writing the wedding announcements for the Times, although obviously that's a huge part of it. It's sort of how I came to understand the nature of commitment and romantic love and lasting love, and why we commit. And why we're still so enchanted with the idea of romantic love across the millennia. And I used, I guess is the word, my interviews with these brides and grooms to better understand that. And, it's a narrative of writing the announcements, but also the twists and turns of my own young relationship with my now husband and how that came to be.
My goodness, that's so inspiring, because I know a lot of people, they look at it and go, gosh, you're a New York Times writer for the wedding section. They probably want to be your best friend, right?
There is a certain amount of that. I mean, I learned very quickly to not say what I did when I was at parties. It was very much a sense of, because I learned that, of course, you work for any enormous organization, especially one that occupies such a position, positive, negative, fraught, whatever you want to call it, in the American imagination. It felt like a big deal to a lot of people. And then when I said, oh, well, I actually write the wedding announcements, especially given the age group that I hung out with, there was very much a sense of, oh, well, my cousin's getting married next month. Can she send in her announcement? Or, oh, I'm glad I know you. I might be getting married in the near future, that sort of thing. So I learned very quickly just to say, oh, I work for the Times, and just sort of try and shut it down with that. It sounds arrogant, and I don't mean it to sound that way. It was just very much yes, people absolutely did want to be your best friend. And then they also wanted to know all the dirty stories about brides and grooms.
Oh my gosh.
Of course.
Well, and that's just part of the nature of the beast. It's just how that industry can be. And for you, what was it like working at the New York Times?
I like to say, and I think this is true, that everything, or nearly everything good in my life, came because of my time at the New York Times. I mean, I met my now husband, obviously, so that was the biggest gift. And we have, we've been married 11 years, and we have this, gorgeous daughter, and, it's great. But beyond that, every day was something interesting. And, you work with, everybody at the Times is there with a singular purpose, and that's to make the product better. And it sounds like a cliche, but I think it's absolutely true in this case. Everybody there is just so driven and smart and talented, and it's just there to tell the truth, and tell the truth in a way that perhaps helps other people. And so I just was able to learn so much, and also just have these crazy experiences. I got to fly on a plane with then Senator Obama as he was bouncing around Iowa during the caucuses. I got to hang out at the back of high school gymnasiums in these tiny towns while Hillary Clinton made the same stump speech over and over. You'd come in the newsroom and you'd hear whispers that like, oh, Beyonce's coming in that day. Or for some reason, like the Stanley Cup would just show up. Like, people
Oh
would
my
be crowded
gosh.
around the actual, honest to God, like giant sterling silver Stanley Cup. Um, but it wasn't just the celebrity encounters and the pop cultural encounters. It was just, I got to work with a group of people who I still count as some of my closest friends, some of the people most vital to me, I mean, obviously, including my husband. And I just was able to learn so much from people who were so good at what they did and who, again, just wanted to do the best thing, the best job that they could every single day. And it's rare, especially at such a young age, to be surrounded by people like that. And it was also, of course, frankly, wildly intimidating and complicated in many, many ways, as is the Times' existence and legacy. But and also, I just had so much fun. And I got to meet this really awesome guy at work, which kind of made things easier in a way. So,
Well, that's exciting. That's really exciting. It seems like, I could see why you think everything great kind of started and happened there. And it's interesting, nowadays you hear about journalists having to do so much fact checking. What are your thoughts on that? How has it been for you over time?
well, so I until recently taught journalism at the University of North Carolina, which is where I graduated. And my husband is still a professor, an adjunct there, rather. He teaches news writing to kids who've never done it before in the journalism school. And so fact checking and facts and objectivity they're sort of bywords in our house. Our poor 6-year-old child is probably going to get tired of us talking about that over dinner as she grows up. But one of the most crucial objectives of these wedding announcements was to fact check them. And people would lie, they'd say they'd want to blow out their resumes somewhat. They'd say they were descended from some Mayflower person and they weren't. In one instance, a person had submitted her wedding announcement and she had been practicing therapy somewhere in New York for many years. And it turns out she wasn't a licensed therapist. And she had hung her shingle years ago and probably seen dozens or hundreds of patients, and nobody realized that she had absolutely no formal training or medical training or any professional leg to stand on in terms of seeing patients until she submitted her wedding announcement to the New York Times. But in terms of fact checking in general, obviously it's just the most vital, crucial part of journalism, because if you can't figure out what is the truth, and how are people going to trust you? And of course, that is something that we're facing right now is in the era of fake news. And I do, the concept of fake news raises my hackles so much. It angers me deeply, because I worked alongside these journalists every single day, who put themselves in harm's way to tell stories about what was happening in the nation and around the world, and to tell it correctly and honestly and truthfully and factually. We knew people who lost their lives in the pursuit of that. And so fact checking has always been at the crux of anything a journalist does, but especially more so now, because I feel like we're in a huge battle to keep the public's trust. And there are many forces pushing against honest to goodness real journalists in that pursuit.
Yeah, there's so much going on there that seems so political. It's, I can understand why you feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I find it fascinating that you would have to fact check, the wedding section and just the things you find out. I mean, what is some of the weirdest things that have happened?
Oh, golly. Well, certainly the thing about the woman basically seeing patients without any sort of licensing or formal training at all whatsoever. Some of the stuff was really, like lying about titles or lying about what their parents really did. And there was an awful lot of, if you'll notice when you read these particular wedding announcements, you'll notice that they often include, the groom's first marriage ended in divorce, or the bride was widowed, or something like that. And a lot of brides and grooms really hated the idea of including that information in the wedding announcement. But one of the points of these wedding announcements was to really paint a portrait in full of these couples And as the weddings editor thought, a former marriage, whether it ended in divorce or the person was widowed, that's part of that full portrait. A second marriage is obviously just as important as a first marriage, but the first marriage is perhaps a setup for the second one, if that makes any sense. It was to the wedding editor's mind, it was just as important as from the school that the bride graduated from, or something like that. I'm trying to think. I just remember catching people out in so many small lies that it embarrassed them so much. And the defensiveness that you would be greeted with when you would call the bride and groom back and say, "Hey, are you sure you're a vice president? Because I called your HR department and they said, this, that, or the other." So they sound like small, really insignificant details. And in the scope of a person's life, they are. But when you get busted for lying like that, it's deeply embarrassing. It's not a good situation, especially in the week or the week or two before your wedding is such a fraught emotional time anyway. So to have to deal with that is just, I think it was really challenging.
Well, it really is interesting when you look at that, because the fact checking that you guys have to go through just to prove, the people are who and what they say they are is such a big deal. And why do you feel like the Times, being listed in the Times vow section is so coveted?
Well, the Times is, again, it occupies such a position in the American imagination, for better and for worse. And also people of the most elite echelons of American society still read the Times. And so to have your wedding announcement read by, I don't know, like maybe the president is reading your wedding announcement, maybe Dr. Biden is sitting down on Sunday morning, drinking a cup of coffee and reading the wedding announcements. Who knows? I'm not saying that's necessarily important to people, but to have your name included in a piece of and a newspaper that occupies the imagination and also is the target of such, it's beloved, but it's also the target of such animosity and vitriol. I mean, it's we have a complicated relationship with papers like the Times and the Post and the Wall Street Journal. It's a flashpoint for so many people. I think that's one thing to be noted in the paper of record. But also, the Times have been printing these wedding announcements for the better part of 2 centuries at this point. And for some families, it's a matter of lineage. It's almost like a family Bible, like a wedding entry in a family Bible. This woman's announcement, I wrote a wedding announcement for this woman. She was a lovely, very unassuming kindergarten teacher in Houston. And she was not the one who submitted the wedding announcement. It was her grandmother, who was she's now long dead, but she was a huge Palm Beach and New York socialite, big Republican fundraiser, hung out at the White House a huge amount, and just had a huge amount of power. And that woman had been deeply connected to families like the Astors and the Vanderbilts, the names of these huge wealthy families that we as Americans have been hearing about for decades and centuries. They occupy a huge place in our in the larger American story. And so to this woman's grandmother, whose wedding announcement had been in there, whose sisters had been in there, whose other daughters had been in there, whose other grandchildren had been in there, it was as much a piece of family lore as anything else. And also the book is called Mergers and Acquisitions. And so marriage, as we all know, to a certain extent, is an economic proposition. And so when you're talking about a marriage, you're talking about the merger of 2 families. And sometimes people would say you're talking also about an acquisition. And so I think it's a bunch of these different reasons, but it all adds up to, for the 2 weeks before what some of these couples get married, the weddings editor holds an outsized position of importance in their minds.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Cate Doty in regards to her new book, Mergers and Acquisitions. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Every day, pets are surrendered and abandoned. For these helpless and hurting animals, Paws Humane Society acts as a voice for the voiceless, providing hope for a brighter future. You can make a difference in the life of a shelter pet. Become a humane hero today. Just $10 a month will provide much-needed food, shelter, medical care, and love. It takes a community. It takes heroes like you. Together we can. Together we will. Together we are Paws Humane. Visit pawshumane.org to be a hero in every animal story.
Lindsay Roy's new book, The Gift of Perspective, is a must-read. Lindsay's unique life stories of surviving and thriving after 2 major life challenges is a wonderful companion to start your new year. It's a great guidebook for anyone facing a challenge, big or small, in business or in life. Lindsay's own stories and the anecdotes of those she met along the way help illuminate real ideas in real circumstances, drawing out reflections and actionable takeaways for all. Full of faith, grit, and humor, this book has the power to change how you see things. The Gift of Perspective is available at Amazon or visit Lindsay's website at lindsayroy.com. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest Cate Doty, who's here to share with us her new book, Mergers and Acquisitions. What's interesting is I have heard your book called like a love letter to New York. Is that what you intended?
To a certain extent, absolutely. I mean, I moved to New York when I was 24 and left it when I was just shy of 40. And for lots of reasons, we had a child, we wanted to be closer to family, but the over a decade that I spent in New York, those were some of the most formative years of my life. And I think that it's one of the biggest tropes or cliches in modern American literature about having a love affair with New York City. But I felt that in this book and in my life, that was the other love affair I was having in my 20s, was with the city that, I longed for and wanted to live in almost my entire life. And I can't even tell you why, when it started. But, when I was a little kid, I knew that I wanted to live in this big bustling city. And I remember the first time I drove through the city, we were on our way to Boston, and we decided my parents drove across Manhattan just so we could see it. And I remember driving up, I don't know, 10th Avenue or something like that, and looking up at the buildings. And my dad said something like, what's so cool? These buildings are absolutely full of people. That every single window in this building is for a person. And I just remember thinking that was the coolest thing. And so when I got to actually live there, I instantly fell in love, and it's a love that endures, and I miss it. I miss it every single day.
Oh my goodness. Well, I can understand going to New York myself, just what a beautiful city it is and how people fall in love with that. In your book, Mergers and Acquisitions, there's some ideologies that challenge the readers. I'd love for you to share that with us.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I would certainly identify as a feminist for sure. I think one of the things about modern marriage, or one of the things about marriage in particular, just in general, is that it evolves over time. I mean, it's a partnership between two people, right? But same-sex partnerships, for example, have been around for centuries. But the Times didn't start chronicling them until 2003. Partnerships between people of different races have been around for centuries, right? But it was an extremely big deal for those partnerships to be discussed and written about in the New York Times or for any wedding announcements, any wedding announcements for that matter. And so one of the things I really wanted to establish in this book is my own perspective on marriage as a truly equal partnership in all ways, shapes, and forms. And that was also one reason why I had such uh, perhaps skepticism about committing, is that the marriages I grew up around, I felt like the women in some way, shape, or form always subsumed themselves. They never made their wishes completely known because their husbands were more important. And I wanted to establish for myself and for my readers and also my child, who at some point will be reading this, hopefully when she's deeply into her 20s, that this is really important to me. And in fact, it's vital. And I refuse to enter a partnership without the acknowledgement that this was completely equal footing. And I wrote the wedding announcement for Sheryl Sandberg, who at that point was, I think she was an executive vice president at Google. And she married a man, Dave Goldberg, who I think, as most of us know, he died in a horrible, tragic accident when the family was vacationing in Mexico. And then, of course, she wrote about what it was like to be a widow and the grief, of course, that comes after. But I remember when I interviewed these people, she was just so powerful. And I'm certainly not here to talk about what I think about Sheryl Sandberg's professional doings now. That is, I have many opinions, but I certainly won't air them here. But what I do remember is that when I talked to her, and then when I talked to her sweet, lovely, really late husband, his respect and admiration for her just shone through, and not just because of who she was as a person, but just who she was professionally, her ambition, all of those things that I think should be celebrated in women. He was doing that. And I thought and this was, 15 years ago, which wasn't that long ago, but for many of us, it feels like ages ago. And that felt almost revolutionary to hear this man just shine with admiration for ambition in his wife or in his future wife. And often, women are criticized for being ambitious, but here he was celebrating that. And I just love that. And I felt that was just so important to make sure that my readers understood that to me is crucial, to have that sort of support in a relationship, no matter what.
That is so important, because you see too often where women kind of merge their identities with their husband or their boyfriends, or fiancés. And a lot of times those identities kind of get lost.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I will tell you, quite frankly, my parents are divorcing after 44 years of marriage. And I can kind of see my mom going through this right now. I mean, of course, theirs is the marriage that I learned most from. And I'm lucky to have them as my parents still, and to have grown up in such a tight, close-knit, loving family. But, my mom is on the cusp of 70. She turns 70 tomorrow. And I can really see her, after being married for 44 years, trying to figure out who she is again. And I think this is a process that you go through no matter if you've been married 2 years or 44 years, no matter what. But and for her generation in particular, I think they got married because in part that was what they thought they were supposed to do. And there was so much of my mom's life that fell under the category of what she was supposed to do, not what she wanted to do. And I can see the effects of that coming out in my mom now. And I have many feelings about this, but the biggest feeling is that I want to make sure that my daughter knows that's not the case. And that's not the way that her mom is living her life. And I'm very lucky in that too.
Oh gosh, she's going to get a head start with having you as her example,
She said she is. Well, I took her to dinner last night and she kept asking the waiter all these questions about, I don't know. She asked if they had chocolate milk and the waiter said no. And she said, but it says it right here on the menu. It says organic chocolate milk. And the woman at the table sitting next to us, we were sitting out on this patio, and the woman sitting next to us just started dying laughing. She was like, look at this kid. And I thought, well, that's, she's going after what she wants. And in this case, it just happens to be chocolate milk. But anyway.
That's a good start.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Well, and gosh, we're in such an interesting time right now. I mean, things are starting to open up. You hear wedding venues are kind of creeping up to open. What do you think are some of the challenges the wedding industry will still experience during this pandemic?
Oh gosh. Well, first and foremost, I hope that the wedding industry comes back full force, honestly. Especially so many, as you know, so many of these wedding businesses that are vital to the weddings industry, the photography and flowers and tailors and all of those are by and large small businesses, often owned by women who are charged with feeding and clothing and housing their families. So I really hope that these come back full force. But in terms of the challenges, I think that number one, as you know, there's just a huge divide in this country about masks and vaccinations and all of that, and vaccination hesitancy. And I am betting that couples are going to have a really hard time. Couples who want to make sure that every wedding guest is vaccinated, for example, they're going to have a really hard time, obviously, enforcing that or asking that of their family and friends who may be hesitant. But the unfortunate thing is that the responsibility for enforcing that might actually come down to like the wedding caterer, who has to stand there with like a digital thermometer or the poor server positioned at the front of the banquet hall who says, "Here's your mask, here's your mask, here's your mask." So I can see some of that happening. I think there's still going to be a lot of reticence. Or a lot of hesitancy rather to gather in large groups. Even outside. In as much as I would love to go to a big, beautiful wedding right now, I still feel very nervous about it. So I think that's going to be one thing. But also I think that, I think this is a good thing. We've learned how to be intimate and how to celebrate each other across these last 14 months without gathering. And that's a good thing, in that we've been able, in some ways, we've been able to maintain connections with our nearest and dearest. And obviously, it's a terrible thing because we need to be able to hug our nearest and dearest. So I think that people in the weddings industry are going to be dealing with couples who not only are facing, the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest choices of their lives, which is where to get married, how to get married, all that, and getting married itself, but also how to do that in an age of huge divisions politically and divisions over vaccines. And I don't know, I think it's going to be a lot for these people in the industry to digest. But I frankly, obviously think we're going to see it through. And I'm interested to see what kind of weddings will happen in the post-COVID era. And I would like to go to some. So
I think everyone wants to go to some.
Oh gosh, I know.
Go have fun and
Yes.
celebrate somebody's acquisition and mergers.
Yes. And somebody asked me the other day, like, what's a wedding tradition that I really love, and I really love the Episcopal tradition of. It's called the Community's Declaration of Consent, where the priest turns to the people in attendance and says, "Who." Do you pledge? Do you all in their community pledge to support them in their marriage? And of course, you're supposed to say yes. And I have found that has never been more important than now, in which everybody needs so much support. Individuals need support, and marriages need support as well. And so, I think that the people getting married need the community, and the marriage as an institution needs the community of support. So, and also they just need a big, awesome party to kick off their life together.
Yeah. I think, people really do want to, come together as a community when it's safe to do so. And so we're kind of walking the line there, making sure that we do everything we're supposed to do, keep everyone safe, Yep.
I hope so. So. We'll get there. I fully expect to go to some bang up weddings in 2022.
Oh, without a doubt. Well, and so I know, gosh, I even hate to ask this question, but I'm just curious as get out, I know that, when authors, they like to write several things at the same time or have something else planned. Do you have another writing that you're working on right now?
Yes. I do. I have a novel in progress about a friendship that starts off in a mill town in North Carolina in the 1920s, and it sort of goes to the 1970s and sort of sees the best and worst of America together and separately. It's completely different from a memoir about writing the wedding announcements, but it's still about interpersonal relationships and the mergers that we find ourselves in. So, yes, I am chipping away at it.
Very exciting, because I know there's a lot of history that's very rich in that area.
Oh, for sure. I mean, my husband told me the other day he needs me to stop buying research books because I have, piles and piles scattered around my office. But it's my office; he can just shut the door. It's fine. But it's been such a joy to do all this research. So I'm hopeful that I can, get it to my agent's hands soon, and we'll see what happens.
That sounds very exciting. My goodness, Cate, I mean, we could talk forever. I just loved your book, Mergers and Acquisitions. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
You can visit my website, catedoty.com. That's Kate with a C. You can find me under the same handle on Twitter and Instagram. And most important, you can buy Mergers and Acquisitions at your favorite local indie bookseller. Or if you're so inclined, the Big A also has many copies, as far as I know, and Barnes & Noble, anywhere they sell books.
Well, Cate, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it and love talking to you.
Well, thank you, Cate. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Mergers and Acquisitions. Mergers and Acquisitions is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.